Hello guys, welcome back to Hold On Survival Stories. I'm your host, and today we're taking you deep underground for a story that will show you just how fragile the line between exploration and disaster can be. This story will demonstrate how years of preparation can save your life in a split second, how the human body can endure unimaginable conditions when the mind refuses to give up, and how sometimes the earth itself can become both your prison and your salvation. You'll witness how 72 hours in complete darkness and freezing temperatures can strip away everything except the most basic human instinct to survive. This is the story of 34-year-old Rebecca Thompson, an experienced spelunker who became trapped 300 feet underground when a rockfall sealed her only way out, and how her knowledge, determination, and an incredible rescue effort brought her back from the edge of death. By the end of this story, you'll understand why expertise, mental toughness, and never accepting defeat can overcome even when you're buried alive beneath tons of rock.
Saturday morning, November 11th, 2023, dawned gray and cold in the limestone hills of southeastern Kentucky. For Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a geology professor at Eastern Kentucky University and an experienced caver with over 15 years of underground exploration, it was the perfect day for what she planned to be a routine solo survey of Whispering Winds Cave, a relatively unknown system she had been mapping for her research on groundwater flow in karst topography. Rebecca had discovered Whispering Winds Cave 3 months earlier while conducting field research for her doctoral dissertation. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of thick vegetation in a remote hollow accessed only by a challenging 2-mile hike through dense forest. What made this cave special wasn't its size or spectacular formations, but its unique geological structure that provided crucial data for her research on how underground water systems respond to climate change. At 34, Rebecca was considered one of the most skilled cavers in the region. She had explored cave systems across the southeastern United States, from the massive chambers of Mammoth Cave to the tight squeezes of Tag Caves along the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia borders. Her small frame, standing just 5'4" and weighing 130 pounds, was perfectly suited for navigating the narrow passages that larger cavers couldn't access. But it wasn't just her physical attributes that made her an exceptional caver. It was her methodical approach, her deep understanding of cave geology, and her absolute respect for the dangers that lurked in the underground world. That morning, Rebecca followed her usual pre-cave ritual with the precision of someone who understood that underground there are no second chances for mistakes. She checked and double-checked her equipment, 3 independent light sources, including a waterproof LED headlamp, backup handheld lights, and emergency chemical light sticks. Her cave pack contained a detailed survey kit with compass, measuring tape, and waterproof notebook, along with emergency supplies including a space blanket, first aid kit, emergency food consisting of energy bars and electrolyte packets, and most importantly, enough batteries to power her lights for 12 hours, 3 times longer than her planned 4-hour survey trip. Rebecca's communication plan was thorough and professional. She had filed a detailed trip plan with Dr. James Martinez, her research supervisor and fellow caver, showing him her intended route on the hand-drawn map she had created during her previous visits to Whispering Winds Cave. The plan called for her to enter the cave at 9 a.m., complete her survey work by 12 p.m., and exit by 1 p.m. If she wasn't back and in cell phone contact by 3 p.m., Dr. Martinez was to contact the local cave rescue team. "Remember, Rebecca," Dr. Martinez had said the night before during their planning session. This is just a survey trip. No exploration of new passages, no pushing leads. Map what you've already seen and get out. Rebecca had nodded, understanding the wisdom in his caution. Solo caving, even for experienced cavers, carried inherent risks that could turn deadly with frightening speed. But Whispering Winds Cave was familiar territory now. She had been inside 4 times over the past 3 months, always as part of her systematic approach to mapping and studying the system. The cave consisted of a main passage, approximately 400 feet long, descending gradually from the entrance to a depth of about 60 feet below ground level, with several smaller side passages that she had already surveyed. What Rebecca didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that 40 feet inside the cave, in a section she had traversed safely multiple times before, a crack in the limestone ceiling had been slowly widening over the past several weeks. Freeze-thaw cycles from the recent cold snap, combined with increased groundwater pressure from heavy rains 2 weeks earlier, had created the perfect conditions for a catastrophic rockfall. At 8:45 a.m., Rebecca parked her Honda CR-V at the trailhead where the old logging road dead-ended into the forest. She sent a quick text to Dr. Martinez. "Starting hike to cave entrance. See you this afternoon." The 2-mile hike to the cave entrance was steep and challenging, following an old deer trail through dense forest, across 2 small creeks, and up a series of rocky ridges. By 9:15 a.m., Rebecca had reached the cave entrance, a low, horizontal opening about 3 feet high and 5 feet wide, partially concealed by rhododendron bushes and moss-covered rocks. She took a moment to appreciate the quiet beauty of the forest around her. The autumn leaves had mostly fallen, creating a thick carpet of brown and gold beneath the bare trees. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the earthy scent of decomposing leaves and the faint mineral smell that always emanated from limestone caves. Rebecca performed her final equipment check, testing each light source and ensuring her radio was set to the proper emergency frequency. She pulled on her cave suit, a tough, water-resistant coverall designed to protect against the abrasive limestone, and adjusted her helmet with its primary LED light. At exactly 9:20 a.m., she took her last breath of surface air and crawled into the entrance of Whispering Winds Cave. The entrance passage was familiar and comfortable, requiring her to crawl for about 15 feet before opening into a walkable corridor. She moved efficiently but carefully, her headlamp's beam dancing across the flowstone formations and delicate soda straw stalactites that decorated the cave's entrance area. The temperature inside was a constant 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, feeling refreshingly cool after her warm hike through the forest. As she progressed deeper into the cave, Rebecca began her survey work, taking compass readings and measurements to verify the accuracy of her previous mapping. The limestone walls around her told the story of millions of years of geological history, with fossil marine life embedded in the rock faces and mineral deposits creating natural artwork that few human eyes would ever see. At 9:35 a.m., Rebecca was 40 feet inside the cave, in a section she had named the Gallery for its beautiful collection of flowstone formations, when she heard a sound that every caver dreads: the sharp crack of failing rock, followed by a rumbling that seemed to come from the earth itself. The sound started as a subtle groaning, almost like the cave was sighing, but it quickly escalated into something much more ominous. Rebecca's caving experience immediately told her what was happening. Somewhere above her, the limestone ceiling was failing. She had perhaps 2 seconds to react before the rockfall began. Training kicked in instantly. Rebecca threw herself forward, diving toward a small alcove she had noticed in the wall during her previous visits. As she hit the ground and rolled into the protective recess, the world behind her exploded in a thunderous cascade of limestone blocks, each weighing hundreds of pounds, crashing down exactly where she had been standing just moments before. The cave filled with choking limestone dust so thick that Rebecca couldn't see her hand in front of her face, even with her headlamp on full power. The sound was deafening, a continuous rumbling and crashing that seemed to go on forever, but probably lasted less than 30 seconds. When the last rock finally settled and silence returned to the cave, Rebecca found herself in a completely transformed underground world. Coughing and spitting limestone dust, Rebecca carefully assessed her situation. She was alive and uninjured, protected by the small alcove that had probably saved her life. But as the dust began to settle and her headlamp beam penetrated the haze, she saw the devastating reality of what had happened. The passage behind her, her only route to the surface, was completely blocked by a wall of limestone rubble that extended from floor to ceiling. Rebecca's heart rate spiked as the full implications hit her. She was trapped 300 feet underground behind what appeared to be tons of fallen rock in a cave system that few people even knew existed. Her radio, which she immediately tried, received only static. The limestone above her was too thick to allow any signal to penetrate to the surface. Fighting down the panic that threatened to overwhelm her, she forced herself to think logically. She was alive, she was uninjured, and she had supplies. Her training had taught her that the first hours after a cave emergency were critical. This was when clear thinking and proper decisions could mean the difference between survival and death. Rebecca checked her watch, 9:37 a.m. According to her trip plan, she wouldn't be considered overdue until 3 p.m., still more than 5 hours away. That meant rescue efforts wouldn't even begin for several hours, and then rescuers would need time to reach the cave, assess the situation, and begin the complex process of clearing the rockfall. She methodically inventoried her resources. Her headlamp showed full battery power, and she had 2 backup light sources plus emergency chemical lights. Her emergency supplies included 4 energy bars, 3 packets of electrolyte mix, and a half-liter water bottle that she had been sipping from during her hike and cave entry. She also had her space blanket and a basic first aid kit. The most critical issue was temperature. At 54 degrees Fahrenheit, the cave was cold enough to cause hypothermia over extended periods, especially since her cave suit had become damp with sweat during her panicked escape from the rockfall. She knew that staying warm would be crucial for long-term survival. At 9:45 a.m., 8 minutes after the rockfall, Rebecca made her first critical survival decision. She would explore the cave beyond the rockfall to see if there might be another way out, but she would do so systematically and carefully, leaving markers so she could find her way back to this location. She used her survey tape to mark her starting point and began a careful exploration of the passages that extended deeper into the cave system. What Rebecca discovered over the next hour changed everything. The rockfall had not only trapped her, but it had also damaged the cave's structure in other ways. Water that normally flowed through small cracks and crevices was now backing up, creating new pools and streams throughout the cave. More ominously, she could hear the sound of dripping and flowing water that hadn't been present during her previous visits. At 10:50 a.m., Rebecca made a discovery that filled her with both hope and terror. Following a narrow passage that she had only partially explored during her previous trips, she found that it connected to a larger chamber she had never seen before. The chamber was beautiful, decorated with flowstone formations and crystal deposits that sparkled in her headlamp beam. But more importantly, she could feel a slight air current flowing through the chamber, suggesting that somewhere, somehow, this part of the cave system connected to the surface. The bad news was that the air current was coming from above, through what appeared to be a vertical shaft that disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of her light.
The opening was approximately 8 feet in diameter and smooth-walled, making it impossible to climb without technical rock climbing equipment that she didn't have. Rebecca sat down in the chamber to think and conserve her energy. She was now more than an hour into her underground ordeal, and she needed to start making some hard decisions about resource management and survival strategy.
By 11 a.m., 2 hours after the rockfall, Rebecca had completed her exploration of the accessible portions of the cave system and faced a harsh reality. There was no other way out. The vertical shaft with the air current was her only potential escape route, but it was impossible to climb without equipment. She was going to have to wait for rescue, and that meant potentially days underground in challenging conditions. Rebecca's geological training now became her survival advantage. She understood that limestone caves maintained constant temperatures, that the air current indicated good ventilation, and that the water sources she was hearing could potentially provide drinking water if her supplies ran out. But she also knew that hypothermia would be her biggest enemy, especially as her clothing became damper from the cave's humidity. At 11:30 a.m., Rebecca made several critical decisions that would prove vital to her survival. First, she moved her base camp to the new chamber near the air current, where the ventilation would help prevent carbon dioxide buildup and provide the freshest air. Second, she began implementing a strict rationing plan for her food and water supplies, calculating that she needed to make them last at least 48 hours, possibly longer. Most importantly, she began a systematic conservation program for her light sources. Rebecca knew that darkness was not just a practical problem underground, it was a psychological killer. She set her headlamp to its lowest useful setting and established a schedule where she would turn off all lights for 30-minute periods every 2 hours to conserve battery power. During these dark periods, she would practice meditation and mental exercises to stay calm and positive. The first lights out period was terrifying. The darkness in a cave is absolute, not the darkness of a room at night where your eyes eventually adjust, but a complete absence of light that is so total it seems to have physical weight. Rebecca could literally not see her hand touching her nose, but she forced herself to stay calm, using breathing exercises she had learned in yoga classes and mentally reviewing her geological knowledge of cave systems. At 1 p.m., when Rebecca should have been exiting the cave according to her original plan, she was instead rationing her first energy bar, eating only half and saving the rest for later. The sweet taste of the peanut butter and chocolate helped boost her morale, but she was already beginning to feel the psychological weight of her situation. By 2 p.m., Rebecca could hear something that made her heart race with hope. Voices echoing faintly through the cave system. Dr. Martinez had arrived early for their planned 3 p.m. check-in and found her car at the trailhead. Following proper cave rescue protocol, he had hiked to the cave entrance to investigate. Rebecca shouted as loudly as she could, her voice echoing through the limestone passages. "Help! I'm trapped inside! There's been a rockfall!" The response came back faintly but clearly. "Rebecca, this is James. Are you injured?" "I'm okay. Trapped about 300 feet in. The main passage is blocked." What followed was a conversation shouted through hundreds of feet of rock and limestone, with Dr. Martinez gathering crucial information about Rebecca's condition and situation, while she provided details about the rockfall and her approximate location within the cave system. At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Martinez made the call that would initiate one of the most complex cave rescues in Kentucky history. He contacted the local emergency services and requested immediate deployment of the regional cave rescue team. Within minutes, his call had been escalated to the National Cave Rescue Commission, and rescue specialists from 3 states were being mobilized. But as Rebecca listened to the rescue preparations beginning on the surface, she also heard Dr. Martinez deliver sobering news. "Rebecca,
The rescue team says it could take 12 to 24 hours to clear the rockfall. You need to conserve your energy and stay warm. 12 to 24 hours. Rebecca looked at her remaining supplies and recalculated her survival equation. She was going to be underground for at least one full night, possibly longer. The psychological impact of this news was almost overwhelming, but Rebecca forced herself to focus on the positive. Rescue was coming, she was in communication with the surface, and she had the knowledge and supplies to survive. As the first day underground stretched into afternoon, Rebecca established routines that would keep her both physically and mentally healthy. Every hour she would do light calisthenics to maintain body heat and circulation. Every 2 hours she would consume a small amount of food or water, and every 4 hours she would move around the cave system, checking for any changes in water levels or airflow that might indicate new problems or opportunities. At 4 p.m., 6 hours after the rockfall, Rebecca heard the first sounds of heavy machinery arriving at the surface. The rescue operation was beginning in earnest. But she also noticed that the sound of dripping water in the cave had increased, suggesting that her underground environment was still changing. As the sun set on November 11, 2013, Rebecca Thompson faced her first night trapped underground, knowing that the next 24 hours would test every survival skill she had learned and every ounce of mental strength she possessed.
By 11 a.m., 2 hours after the rockfall, Rebecca had completed her exploration of the accessible portions of the cave system and faced a harsh reality. There was no other way out. The vertical shaft with the air current was her only potential escape route, but it was impossible to climb without equipment. She was going to have to wait for rescue, and that meant potentially days underground in challenging conditions. Rebecca's geological training now became her survival advantage. She understood that limestone caves maintained constant temperatures, that the air current indicated good ventilation, and that the water sources she was hearing could potentially provide drinking water if her supplies ran out. But she also knew that hypothermia would be her biggest enemy, especially as her clothing became damper from the cave's humidity. At 11:30 a.m., Rebecca made several critical decisions that would prove vital to her survival. First, she moved her base camp to the new chamber near the air current, where the ventilation would help prevent carbon dioxide buildup and provide the freshest air. Second, she began implementing a strict rationing plan for her food and water supplies, calculating that she needed to make them last at least 48 hours, possibly longer. Most importantly, she began a systematic conservation program for her light sources. Rebecca knew that darkness was not just a practical problem underground, it was a psychological killer. She set her headlamp to its lowest useful setting and established a schedule where she would turn off all lights for 30-minute periods every 2 hours to conserve battery power. During these dark periods, she would practice meditation and mental exercises to stay calm and positive. The first lights out period was terrifying. The darkness in a cave is absolute, not the darkness of a room at night where your eyes eventually adjust, but a complete absence of light that is so total it seems to have physical weight. Rebecca could literally not see her hand touching her nose. But she forced herself to stay calm, using breathing exercises she had learned in yoga classes and mentally reviewing her geological knowledge of cave systems. At 1 p.m., when Rebecca should have been exiting the cave according to her original plan, she was instead rationing her first energy bar, eating only half and saving the rest for later. The sweet taste of the peanut butter and chocolate helped boost her morale, but she was already beginning to feel the psychological weight of her situation. By 2 p.m., Rebecca could hear something that made her heart race with hope. Voices
echoing faintly through the cave system. Dr. Martinez had arrived early for their planned 3 p.m. check-in and found her car at the trailhead. Following proper cave rescue protocol, he had hiked to the cave entrance to investigate. Rebecca shouted as loudly as she could, her voice echoing through the limestone passages. "Help! I'm trapped inside! There's been a rockfall!" The response came back faintly but clearly. "Rebecca, this is James. Are you injured?" "I'm okay. Trapped about 300 feet in. The main passage is blocked." What followed was a conversation shouted through hundreds of feet of rock and limestone, with Dr. Martinez gathering crucial information about Rebecca's condition and situation while she provided details about the rockfall and her approximate location within the cave system. At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Martinez made the call that would initiate one of the most complex cave rescues in Kentucky history. He contacted the local emergency services and requested immediate deployment of the regional cave rescue team. Within minutes, his call had been escalated to the National Cave Rescue Commission, and rescue specialists from 3 states were being mobilized. But as Rebecca listened to the rescue preparations beginning on the surface, she also heard Dr. Martinez deliver the sobering news. "Rebecca, the rescue team says it could take 12 to 24 hours to clear the rockfall. You need to conserve your energy and stay warm." 12 to 24 hours. Rebecca looked at her remaining supplies and recalculated her survival equation. She was going to be underground for at least 1 full night, possibly longer. The psychological impact of this news was almost overwhelming, but Rebecca forced herself to focus on the positive. Rescue was coming. She was in communication with the surface, and she had the knowledge and supplies to survive. As the first day underground stretched into afternoon, Rebecca established routines that would keep her both physically and mentally healthy. Every hour, she would do light calisthenics to maintain body heat and circulation. Every 2 hours, she would consume a small amount of food or water. And every 4 hours, she would move around the cave system, checking for any changes in water levels or airflow that might indicate new problems or opportunities. At 4 p.m., 6 hours after the rockfall, Rebecca heard the first sounds of heavy machinery arriving at the surface. The rescue operation was beginning in earnest. But she also noticed that the sound of dripping water in the cave had increased, suggesting that her underground environment was still changing. As the sun set on November 11, 2023, Rebecca Thompson faced her first night trapped underground, knowing that the next 24 hours would test every survival skill she had learned and every ounce of mental strength she possessed.
Dawn on November 12th brought no light to Rebecca's underground world, but it did bring renewed sounds of rescue activity. At 6 a.m., 18 hours after the rockfall, she could hear heavy machinery starting up and the voices of fresh rescue team members who had arrived overnight. "Rebecca," Dr. Martinez called through the rock. "The team brought in a pneumatic drill overnight. They're going to start working on the larger blocks." The sound of the pneumatic drill was both encouraging and terrifying. Rebecca could feel the vibrations through the cave floor, and she worried that the drilling might destabilize other parts of the cave system. Her fears proved justified when at 8 a.m., a section of ceiling about 50 feet from her location suddenly collapsed, creating another pile of rubble and filling the cave with choking dust. This second rockfall was smaller than the first, but it had a devastating psychological impact on Rebecca. The cave system was definitely unstable, and rescue efforts might actually be making her situation more dangerous. She was forced to move her base camp again, relocating to a more protected area further from the drilling operations. At 10 a.m., 25 hours underground,
Rebecca faced her first real physical crisis. She had been rationing her water carefully, but the limestone dust from the second rockfall had left her throat parched and irritated. She was forced to locate and test one of the new water sources she had identified the previous day. Using her geological knowledge, Rebecca found a small pool where clean groundwater was collecting after filtering through limestone rock. She tested it first by putting a small amount on her lips, then on her tongue, waiting several minutes between each step to check for any adverse reactions. The water tasted strongly of minerals, but seemed safe to drink. This discovery effectively solved her long-term water supply problem, but it also meant drinking untested groundwater, with all the potential health risks that entailed. The second day also brought Rebecca's most serious psychological challenge. At noon, exactly 27 hours after the rockfall, she experienced what cave rescue specialists call underground breakdown, a sudden onset of claustrophobia and panic that can be fatal if not controlled quickly. The attack started when Rebecca began calculating how much earth was above her head. 300 feet underground meant millions of tons of rock and soil pressing down. The cave passage was only 6 feet wide, a tiny bubble of air in an unimaginably vast mass of stone. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except imagine the cave ceiling collapsing and burying her alive. Rebecca's training saved her life during this crisis. Instead of fighting the panic, she used a technique called grounding that she had learned in her wilderness first aid courses. She forced herself to name 5 things she could see with her headlamp, 4 things she could touch, 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, and 1 thing she could taste. The exercise forced her mind to focus on immediate, concrete sensory information instead of abstract fears. The panic attack lasted about 20 minutes, but Rebecca recovered and used the experience to develop new mental strategies for coping with her underground confinement. She began thinking of the cave not as a tomb, but as a shelter that was protecting her while rescuers worked to free her. At 2 p.m. on the second day, Rebecca received news that boosted her morale dramatically. The rescue team had successfully removed 2 of the largest blocks from the rockfall and could now see into the main passage. They estimated that she was only about 50 feet away from the blockage, closer than they had initially thought. "Rebecca!" Dr. Martinez shouted through the rock. "The team can see your light reflecting off the cave wall. They think they can reach you by tonight." For the first time in 30 hours, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that rescue was not just possible, but imminent. She began preparing for extraction, organizing her equipment, and mentally rehearsing the process of moving through what would likely be a narrow opening in the rubble pile. But at 4 p.m., disaster struck again. As the rescue team attempted to remove another large block, it shifted unexpectedly, causing a partial collapse that resealed the opening they had created. 3 rescue workers were nearly caught in the secondary rockfall, and the rescue operation was suspended pending a complete structural reassessment of the cave entrance. "Rebecca," came Dr. Martinez's voice, heavy with disappointment. "There's been another collapse. The team needs to bring in structural engineers before they can continue safely." The news was devastating. Rebecca had been emotionally prepared for rescue that evening, and the sudden reversal sent her into her deepest despair since the ordeal began. She was facing at least another full night underground, possibly longer. As the second night fell, Rebecca made a crucial decision about her mental approach to survival. Instead of focusing on rescue, which was beyond her control, she would focus on the things she could control: staying warm, conserving resources, and maintaining her mental health. She set a goal of surviving not just until rescue arrived, but of emerging from the cave in good enough condition to walk out under her own power.
November 13th, 2023 marked the beginning of Rebecca's third day underground. She had now been trapped for 48 hours, longer than she had ever imagined possible when the rockfall first occurred. But she was still alive, still mentally sharp, and still determined to survive. The structural engineers had worked through the night, and at 7 a.m., Rebecca heard the sweet sound of drilling resume. But this time, the approach was different. Instead of trying to clear the main passage, the engineers had decided to create a bypass route through a side passage that connected to the area where Rebecca was trapped. "Rebecca," Dr. Martinez called, "they're drilling a new tunnel that will connect to the chamber where you're located. It's going to take most of the day, but they're confident it will work." Rebecca felt a mixture of hope and exhaustion. After 2 days underground, she was beginning to feel the cumulative effects of stress, limited food, poor sleep, and constant cold. Her hands were starting to shake slightly from a combination of low blood sugar and hypothermia, and she had to concentrate harder to perform simple tasks. At 10 a.m., 53 hours after the rockfall, Rebecca made a discovery that would prove crucial to her final survival. While exploring areas of the cave she hadn't examined before, she found what appeared to be an ancient Native American shelter, a small alcove where someone had built fires long ago, evidenced by charcoal stains on the cave walls and ceiling. More importantly, the alcove contained the remains of dry wood, apparently carried into the cave generations ago and preserved by the constant cool, dry conditions. Rebecca realized she could potentially build a small fire to help maintain her body temperature during the final phase of her ordeal. Using her waterproof matches and some paper from her survey notebook as tinder, Rebecca successfully built a small fire using the ancient wood. The warmth was incredible, but even more important was the psychological boost of having light and heat that didn't depend on her battery-powered equipment. For the first time in 3 days, she felt truly warm. At 1 p.m. on the third day, Rebecca heard the most beautiful sound of her life. A drill bit breaking through into the chamber where she was waiting. A small hole, barely large enough for her fist, connected her to the rescue tunnel the engineers were creating. "Rebecca," came a voice through the hole. Not Dr. Martinez shouting through hundreds of feet of rock, but a rescue worker speaking directly to her through just a few feet of limestone. "We're almost there. Are you ready to come home?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," Rebecca replied, her voice cracking with emotion for the first time since the ordeal began. Over the next 4 hours, the rescue team worked methodically to enlarge the opening, constantly checking for structural stability and ensuring that their work wouldn't cause additional collapses. Rebecca could see their headlamps working in the tunnel, could hear their voices discussing technical aspects of the rescue, and could smell the fresh forest air flowing through the opening they were creating. At 5:17 p.m. on November 13th, 2023, exactly 72 hours and 57 minutes after the rockfall that had trapped her, Rebecca Thompson saw daylight for the first time in 3 days.
The opening the rescue team had created was just large enough for her to crawl through, but it was her pathway to freedom. The extraction itself was anticlimactic compared to the drama of the previous 3 days. Rebecca crawled through the rescue tunnel, was helped to her feet by waiting rescue workers, and walked out of Whispering Wind's cave under her own power. She was cold, exhausted, and covered in limestone dust, but she was alive and in remarkably good condition considering her ordeal. The first person she saw when she emerged from the cave entrance was Dr. Martinez, who had maintained his vigil at the cave for the entire 73 hours of her entrapment. The first thing she said was, "James, we need to update our cave safety protocols."
Rebecca's emergence from Whispering Wind's cave after 73 hours underground was captured by news crews who had been covering the rescue operation. The image of her walking out of the cave entrance, covered in limestone dust but smiling and alert, became an iconic photograph that appeared in newspapers and magazines across the country. The paramedics who examined Rebecca at the scene were amazed by her condition. "Dr. Thompson, considering what you've been through, you're in remarkable shape," said EMT Sarah L. Williams. "Your core body temperature is slightly low, and you are dehydrated, but you don't show signs of serious hypothermia or any significant medical complications." "How was that possible?" asked one of the news reporters who had gathered to cover the rescue. Rebecca, wrapped in warm blankets and sipping hot coffee that tasted better than anything she had ever experienced, explained her survival strategy. "I used my geological knowledge to understand the cave environment. I had emergency supplies that I rationed carefully, and I kept my mind focused on problems I could solve rather than dwelling on things beyond my control." Dr. Martinez, who had barely slept during the 3-day vigil, was emotional as he described the rescue operation. This was a textbook example of how proper preparation, clear communication, and never giving up can overcome even the most dire circumstances. Rebecca's training and mental toughness kept her alive, but it took the coordinated efforts of cave rescue teams from 3 states to get her out. The rescue operation had involved over 40 personnel, including cave rescue specialists, structural engineers, heavy equipment operators, and support staff. The cost exceeded $150,000, but as rescue coordinator Captain Mike Rodriguez pointed out, you can't put a price on a human life. Dr. Martinez's research work is valuable to science, but more importantly, she's someone's daughter, sister, and friend. 3 weeks later, Rebecca returned to her teaching position at Eastern Kentucky University, where she had become something of a celebrity among her students. Her experience in Whispering Wind's cave had provided her with unprecedented data about how cave systems respond to structural changes and groundwater flow disruptions. Her research paper about the geological aspects of her entrapment would later be published in the Journal of Cave and Karst Studies and become a valuable resource for cave rescue operations. But Rebecca's most important contribution came through her work with the National Cave Rescue Commission to update safety protocols for solo caving. Her experience led to new recommendations for emergency supplies, communication procedures, and risk assessment that would help prevent other cavers from experiencing similar entrapments. "The thing people don't understand about cave rescue," Rebecca explained during a safety seminar 6 months after her rescue, "is that the cave doesn't care about your experience level or your preparation. Accidents can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. The key is being ready for the unexpected and never giving up hope when things go wrong." Rebecca never returned to Whispering Wind's cave. The rockfall that had trapped her had fundamentally changed the cave's structure, making it too dangerous for future exploration. But she continued her research in other cave systems throughout Kentucky, always with updated safety protocols and never again alone.
The 73 hours I spent underground changed my perspective on everything, Rebecca reflected during a television interview on the first anniversary of her rescue. I learned that the human body and mind are capable of enduring far more than we think possible, that preparation and knowledge really can mean the difference between life and death, and that there are always people willing to risk their own safety to help a stranger in trouble. When asked what kept her going during the darkest moments underground, Rebecca's answer was simple. I promised myself that I would walk out of that cave under my own power. I had too much to live for to give up, and too much respect for the people risking their lives to rescue me, to do anything less than everything I could to survive.
This story, like all the stories we share on Hold On, Survival Stories, reminds us that survival is often not about extraordinary people in ordinary circumstances, but about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength when faced with life-threatening situations. Dr. Rebecca Thompson's 73 hours underground demonstrates the power of preparation, knowledge, and mental toughness in overcoming seemingly impossible odds. The heroes of this story include not just Rebecca herself, but the rescue teams who worked around the clock in dangerous conditions to free her, the engineers who found creative solutions to seemingly impossible technical challenges, and Dr. Martinez, who maintained his vigil at the cave entrance for 3 full days, serving as Rebecca's lifeline to the outside world. Rebecca's story teaches us that expertise and preparation can save your life, but they're only valuable if combined with the mental strength to use them effectively under extreme stress. Her geological knowledge helped her find water and understand her environment. Her emergency supplies kept her alive. But it was her determination to never give up that carried her through the darkest hours when rescue seemed impossible. Most importantly, Rebecca's story shows us that even when we're buried under tons of rock, isolated from all human contact, and facing what seems like certain death, there's always reason to hold on. There are always people working to help us, always solutions to problems that seem unsolvable, and always hope for another day. But before we go, I want to ask you guys some questions. Have you ever been in a situation where your preparation and training saved you from disaster? If you were trapped underground for 3 days, what mental strategies would you use to stay positive and focused? And here's a big one. Do you have the emergency supplies and knowledge needed to survive if you found yourself in an unexpected survival situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own stories of preparation and survival if you feel comfortable. Your experience might help someone else who finds themselves in a life-threatening situation. And if this story inspired you or taught you something about the importance of emergency preparedness, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring you more incredible survival stories every week. Thank you for listening to Hold On, Survival Stories. Stay safe, stay prepared, and remember, you're stronger than you know.